Welcome back to Breakfast at Stinson's. This is John Asher Thompson. Today we have Kelli Kelley with us. Kelli is the founder of an organization called Hand to Hold, which helps families who have gone through the NICU, the Neonatal Intensive Care Unit, and survived that experience. We're really glad to have her and her insight today, so please stay tuned and subscribe if you would. We would love to have you. Welcome back to Breakfast at Stinson's. Today we have Kelli Kelley with us. Kelli is actually met Kelli through my wife, and we have some things in common, but I'm going to let her tell about her organization and some of the things. So welcome.
I am so happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, thanks. So just first, let's dive in and talk about the NICU and your organization. And so can you tell us what's it called and how you got it started, and then we'll just go from there.
You bet. So I founded the organization Hand to Hold, and it is a nonprofit organization. We did birth the organization here in Austin. We're homegrown, but we have
I like that. That's nice, birth. Did you get that? That was good.
We birthed that here,
Yeah.
but we have a national presence, actually an international presence now. We are helping people all over the world, but started here about 8 years ago. And we provide support to families who are in the neonatal intensive care unit or who have lost a baby. And it was important. Yesterday, we were having a discussion with someone, and they had never seen a NICU. And it really reminded me that some people have not had that experience. So I think it's really important to look at it through the lens of intensive care. So most of us who have had a friend or a family member at some point in our lives that have required intensive care. And so you know what that means when someone's in the ICU, just how critical that is. That is a life-threatening illness, medical need that they're in the ICU. So imagine your 1-pound baby in the ICU for 4 months, 5 months, a year. It's a really traumatic and difficult situation.
Well, I'll come out and tell you, two of my 3 boys actually were in the NICU. So it's really powerful when you say intensive care, because everybody just calls it the NICU, but it is remarkable if you think back, just stop and think that this is your baby and it's intensive care and what that means for an adult. So it's really powerful and obviously a huge part in our lives. How did it happen for you? How did the organization start? Yeah.
Well, I look at it as kind of God had an overarching plan from a long time ago, and I'll back up and tell you about that in a little bit. But ultimately, I had a baby born at 24 weeks in August of 2000. I was driving home in rush hour traffic on Mopac, and began to feel some labor pains. I didn't know they were labor pains. Had not gotten that far along to even had a class or read in the book or anything about having complications that early in my pregnancy. There had been no indication whatsoever that there were complications. So I took more than an hour to get home. And I remember I passed the first exit and I was like, I could drive myself to Seton if I drove there, but that's not where I'm supposed to deliver. I know my doctor practices at St. David, so I should keep driving. And, and just all the scenarios that were playing out in my head, but I really felt like I'm going to go in there and they're going to tell me everything's fine, and I'm just, overreacting to some Braxton Hicks or something. So kept driving until I got home, and my husband was sitting there in his baseball uniform. He was going to intramural league baseball team game that night, and I really didn't want to prevent him from going. But
was this your first child?
This is our first baby. Okay. So I just remember saying, I'm sick. I think something's wrong. I just don't feel right. And we laugh now, but, 2 college-educated, mature adults, as we thought we were, we called our mothers. Because who else are you going to...
Because they know best.
They know best. And so I wasn't able to get in touch with my mom, but we reached his mother in Michigan, and she asked me a series of questions that, it didn't even occur to ask myself. And she said, you need to hang up the phone and call 911. And that's what we did. And we made it to the hospital in the nick of time to deliver our baby. So he was a pound and a half and 12 and a half inches long. And we were in the NICU then for 4 months. So my life just changed instantly.
Was it St. David's?
It was
downtown?
It was St. David's.
Who was the doctor? Remember the?
Well, my OB had changed multiple times, so
Okay.
I didn't have.
We were
actually-
there at St. David's. I was just so we
So
were
we
there.
didn't have
That
our-
was August of
August of 2000. Yes.
So I was there in September of 01. So 5 days before 9/11. So we spent a lot of time in that very same NICU.
I bet you did.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure we did have many of the same neonatologists and
Yeah.
nurses. Many of them are still practicing there, and
Yeah.
it just did become our home away from home, and still very attached to that hospital.
Oh yeah, we are. So how did that lead to Hand to Hold?
Well, when Jackson was about 5, many of our family members had begun to give donations to the March of Dimes in his name to honor him. And so I began to look into the March of Dimes and what they did and how that was associated with premature birth, and learned that their research that they had funded had led to some pretty significant breakthroughs in neonatology, neonatal care. So I approached the March of Dimes here, and when they learned I had done some public speaking, had some marketing, PR background, they invited us to be the ambassador family. And so I spent that year helping the March of Dimes in raising funding for their programming here in Austin, which led to some opportunities on a national level where they asked me to participate in some national councils on, at that time they were going through a name change and looking at some different fundraising efforts. And as I began to do that and meet families across the country, we were all saying very similar things, and how much we loved and appreciated the March of Dimes and the research they had done and the things that they had provided to ensure the best outcome medically for the baby. But no one was really looking at the psychosocial, the emotional, mental health of the parents. And we were all talking about this very traumatic experience we had been through. And the majority of us at that time were seeking therapy for anxiety disorders and depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. And so we really realized that this was a need that was not being addressed. And now we know a lot more about this, but when you take your baby to the pediatrician, if you've had a full-term healthy baby, the mother is typically screened for postpartum depression. But when you're in the NICU, you're not going to see a pediatrician. Your first pediatrician visit is once they've been discharged. So for Jackson, that was more than 4 months. So no one ever talked to me about my own mental health while I was going through the NICU or after I was discharged. And I have to say, it was even more difficult once we went home because we were very isolated. My son was very medically fragile. And so you were not going to...
How long was he in?
It was 4 months.
Oh,
4
wow.
months. And so, we weren't going to a play group. You weren't having a lot of visitors in your home for fear of, infection and viruses
yeah.
and things like that. And so you're very isolated. And after you've been through a very traumatic and anxious time, we talked about it's kind of like you're going 100 miles an hour and it comes to a dramatic halt when you get home with a baby, and then you're kind of on lockdown.
Can I stop you, because I don't know how many people will know or be familiar with what the intensive care unit is even like for these babies. My experience is that, to your point, like your life just revolves. So instead of bringing your child home, your life revolves around the hospital. They're in a room with a lot of other babies. You got to scrub to get in. But can you talk for a minute what that's like, what it was like for you? I mean, what's your day like? My recollection is it's just consuming, right? You're there, all night, all day. It's when do you go? When do you stay home? Do you feel guilty for staying home? Describe that, would you?
All of those things, absolutely. You're exactly right. And in some ways, if you've been to a casino and you kind of lose track of day and night and time, that's the same with the NICU. There's typically not a lot of windows, and so you're spending all of your time, as much time as they will let you. Back then, there were actually hours where the NICU was closed, with a push towards what we call family-centered care. hospitals are now trying very hard to stay open at all
Oh.
hours for NICU parents.
Hmm.
But for someone like me who lived more than 30 minutes from the NICU, which actually is a blessing, we know families that are hours away
Mm.
from home and needing to stay at the Ronald McDonald
Mm-hmm.
House or find apartments and housing while their babies are in the NICU. So, you start with that drive and traffic, and you're trying to get there. And in the beginning, you're really just a bystander. The babies are so medically fragile that you're not able to hold them. Really, you're kind of discouraged even from touching them. You can't overstimulate them. Their skin is so fragile, it tears very, very
Mm.
easily. And so you don't want to talk or sing or all the typical things you would do when you're having a newborn baby. You're really just there to see them, and you're just seeing this little creature on the
Mm.
outside that should be on the inside being protected. So we talk about they can look very alien like. They are so tiny and almost translucent. The skin is so thin. And for us, you couldn't even see their face. He had so many tubes and,
Yeah, I
he
remember. Oh.
on a respirator and
Yeah.
all the monitors. And in those first days, you're just trying
Mm.
to figure out what is everything for. You don't even know what connects to everything and what everything's doing, and trying to.
I just remember eyes glued on the heart monitor and the OSAT deal that they would have, and that and then anytime there was a beep, it was just terror.
It's terrifying. It is. And I'd say my husband was the same way. I did, focus on the baby and watch the baby much more than I did the monitors. But that was his comfort in looking at the monitors. But their eyes are still sealed shut when they're born that early. And, everything's there. It's just so miniature and small. So the role of the parent is extremely important very early on in helping the parent bond with their baby and understand, how do you bond through glass? If that baby is in this glass box, this incubator, how am I supposed to bond with this baby I can't hold, and I'm not feeding and I'm not bathing, all the things that you would typically do? So we come alongside families and work with them during their NICU stay at the bedside, talking to them about their emotions and offering support and information on the bonding process. Often that diaper change is what we consider the first hold. I was able to change the diaper when he was about 5, 6 days old, and that was really the first interaction that I felt like I was his mom. That's a typical mom thing to do, is to change the diaper.
How's it different, from the time you were there in 2000 to 2018? Thankfully, I haven't been with our kids in a while. So is it dramatic, the difference? Are there things that you could point to that, oh my gosh, it's so much more advanced? Or, I mean, you mentioned one thing about staying open 24 hours with some of these facilities. What are the differences that you see today?
There are a lot of differences. I think that with the focus on family-centered care over the past decade, we're seeing lots of advancements. Not so much necessarily in the care of the baby itself. I think we've seen a lot of advancements more in how do we include the parent and how do we make it more accommodating. Everything from looking at what do NICUs look like, the aesthetics of them, and making sure that there are rooms for parents to stay and be there when the baby is very critical. And again, on the visiting hours, but through Handle Hold, we have worked very closely with the hospital to look at how can we improve family-centered care. And one of the things is support groups. That was not something that was readily available to us when we were there. So we lead support groups every week. We've introduced something called the Milestone Bead Program, which we're very proud of. And the parents receive a stork necklace when the baby is born. And it's a way to celebrate. And then the NICU is a very challenging, traumatic, almost depressing experience. And so what we want to do is help them celebrate the milestones. So for that first diaper change, you receive a diaper pen for your bead necklace. And then the first bottle and the first bath is a little silver duck. Those things. And so when you leave after your NICU stay, you really have almost this visual journey, this visual way of tracking your journey and all those major milestones throughout the NICU stay.
Let's backtrack a little bit, and I got you off topic a bit, but this is all so it's personal for me as well, and I think very interesting. But you were with the March of Dimes. So as you talk about hand to hold, go back to how you moved from March of Dimes to starting this organization. I've got a lot of questions I'd love to ask you, but let's go back to the beginning, how it came about.
My husband said that he knew right away, once we were in the NICU, that I would take that experience and build something. I did not. I mean, that really was the furthest thing from my mind at the time of building a nonprofit. I knew something was missing, and as I had stated, as I met families from across the country, we were identifying what really we felt were missing. And so I came back and, used my connections to look at what are the other nonprofits doing.
What were you doing at the time? You said you had background in marketing.
I did. When Jackson was born, I was working for a high-tech PR firm here in Austin.
Okay.
And doing public relations and marketing, and loved it, absolutely loved it. And I stayed there for a year after Jackson was born. I actually had to go back to work while he was in the NICU because my insurance was better than my husband's, and we knew he was going to be over $1 million baby. And so I did have to return to work, and that was very, very difficult. And we see that same challenge over and over again every day with our NICU families that have to go back to work. So many of them choose to, take 6 weeks off after the delivery and then go back to work and then save some time for once the baby comes home. Our babies typically are not able to go into any kind of childcare situation.
Right.
So we're looking at, many, many times that one of the family members has to let go of one of their jobs. And then you've got the financial implications of that as well. So I was very fortunate that my job was very supportive and helped me through that period of time where I had to work while he was still in the NICU. And then once he came home, I worked part-time from home. And
for people listening, by the way, August of 2000, not exactly a great time in the tech space.
No.
I mean, I'm sure just going to kind of underscore the realities of living, right? You want to, and I appreciate you want to stay home. I mean, I was working, but you want to stay home and you want to be with the family and with your spouse and the child, and but you got to pay rent, or you got to eat, you got to, right? I mean, you got to live.
You do. And so my
hard.
company was wonderful in that, they supported us during that first year, and then they came back to me and said, okay, we need you back full time. This is your client list. This is your travel schedule. These are the people you'll be managing. This is the budget you'd be managing. And, I got to take that home really and sit with my husband and look at it and say, okay, I can do this, but this is what I'll need from you in order for me to be able to do this. And we just made the decision to take a leap of faith, and that I would leave my job, because the other thing that was happening was, Jackson needed lots of therapy. And I wanted to be involved in all of those therapy appointments. I didn't, want our nanny to, be taking. I just felt like that was my role. And so we made that very difficult decision that I would leave my job. And I still remember riding down the elevator with my box with all my stuff in it and thinking, how will I ever get back into this industry? Public relations changes very quickly. And I was like, will I ever be able to go back to work? And will I want to? So there were some really...
So was that in the fall of 01?
That would have been the fall of 01, yeah. That's
wow.
Right. And so...
World was a crazy place in the fall of 01.
Austin Austin was going through a lot of challenges.
Well, Austin was challenging. You had 9/11. You had all this crazy... I mean, I remember it seared into my brain that fall, which is the fall when my son was... My oldest was born. So
absolutely.
I'm very aware of... Nobody knew.
Nobody knew what the future held. And maybe that actually probably played some role in that decision of family first and what's really important and what do we need to do for our family. And so I'm sure that did play into those decisions. So as I said, I began to look at other nonprofits here. There's a lot of nonprofits in the Austin space, and look at who's providing support to the family. There are organizations like Easter Seals and Any Baby Can that provide some amazing programs for our babies. but what about the families themselves and preparing families for caring for a medically fragile child? And I was just finding that there was really no one in that space. So then I tried to convince other people to start organizations and programs. And, I was really reaching out to other people to take this on. Andrea Ball from The Statesman had written a wonderful series around that time about her own NICU experience and stay, and I was really encouraging her to help get something started. And she's like, why not you? I'm like, me? It just never occurred to me that I would ever lead a nonprofit. But then when I look back at all the experiences that have been in my life kind of leading up to this opportunity, I see that, I don't think that was a mistake, that I had the opportunity right out of college. I worked for a nonprofit for a very short period of time in public relations before going into high-tech PR. And then once I was at the PR firm, I was leading our pro bono account, which just happened to be the Lance Armstrong Foundation, which became Livestrong. And so I got the opportunity to sit around that table with Lance and the other decision makers from his board and determining, who are we and how are we different? Looking at the other cancer organizations and how are we different? And I just remember Lance talking about survivorship and needing navigation through the experience, but, really focusing on what happens after you survive this. And so that stayed with me. And so when I started looking at starting Handlehold, it really was about, our babies are surviving. The neonatal care now, 90% of the babies are surviving. But
do you have any idea how many babies go into NICU as a percentage of the overall birth population? I don't mean to put you on the spot. I have no real sense of that.
We see different figures. They range anywhere from 1 out of 8 to 1 out of 10, depending on which state. We know more than 500,000 roughly babies born preterm, but babies go into the NICU for many different reasons. It's not always that it's a preterm birth. And so those numbers are a little more complicated.
I'm always amazed how often it comes up and how many people out there went through that experience, right? And the kids who've come out, and you see the results are so astounding. We've got 2 giant children that you would never know had been in, they came out tiny and they were in the intensive care, and but it run across all the time, people.
We are very blessed. And I actually was going to say that, because of the tremendous advancements in neonatal care, when Jackson was born, they were trying to determine how far along in the pregnancy I was. We were kind of confused. My due date had changed a couple of times. And once they realized he potentially is 24 weeks in a day, and that was viable. But before that, they would not have tried to save my baby. So it was 24 weeks was the viability. And so now we're saving babies 22 and 23 weeks. So what that means is we're saving more babies and even earlier. So what does that mean? That means a longer NICU stay.
Right.
Potentially that means more challenges for the baby long term after they go home. And so we find that our support is even more critical to be there for these, what we call micro preemies throughout the NICU stay, and then preparing the family to care for this medically fragile baby long term.
So 23 weeks, that means basically 17 weeks to term, right?
That's right.
What's going on with a baby at 23 weeks?
Well, the main issue is
what differentiate what makes it viable? What makes the baby viable at 22 or 23 and not at 18, 19, 20?
Oh, I think the main thing that we're looking at is lung development. And when we talked about the research earlier funded by the March of Dimes, that was surfactant, and surfactant probably is the key changer for our NICU babies in allowing for the lungs to expand. So they're intubated and given surfactant therapy, and that allows their lungs, it kind of washes the lungs, because when a baby is born that early, the lungs are it almost has this really sticky substance to it. Sometimes they'll give you a little tiny stir straw for you to breathe through, and that is basically what is happening. Their lungs are collapsed and they cannot inflate, and so they're basically suffocating. No matter what kind of respiratory care we are able to provide. So they're not able to regulate their body temperatures, right? So that's why they're in the incubators, and that's why they need that care. We see a lot of jaundice, and so very high bilirubin levels and needing treatments for jaundice. The feeding issues is a huge issue. So there's something called necrotizing enterocolitis, and that's involving
know about that,
you
yeah.
know about that.
Oh,
So
yeah.
that's one of the leading challenges for our NICU babies and their intestines and development. And the challenge that they all face before being able to be discharged is learning to eat, and that is one of the last things that comes because that requires a lot of brain development to be able to suck and swallow and continue to breathe and not desat. So there's a lot
DSAT.
happening.
You want to explain what DSAT?
DSAT means that their oxygenation. Let me restate that. Their oxygenation and being able to maintain that the right amount of oxygen within the lungs, and so it's just a very difficult thing for them not to aspirate while they are swallowing, and that brain development that is needed for them. So that's usually the last big challenge that they're facing before they go home.
So you got yourself, did you take your idea? Did you have this idea and you took it to Lance Armstrong's board? Or how did that, walk me through that time period?
Okay.
And this is what year, what year is,
Oh,
roughly?
Roughly, this would have been 2006, 7, 8,
Okay.
in there, where, I was beginning to write on the back of napkins. You hear that a lot.
Yeah.
You're taking a lot of meetings. You're getting people's ideas. You're trying to figure out who else could go do this.
Had you made a decision already at that point that you wanted to do something?
Oh, no.
Not at all, okay.
No, really wanted to be an advocate and wanted to see change. I began to meet with my hospital just on some small things that I thought that my hospital, St. David's, could do, and seeing their reaction. Dr. Sonny Rivera was a neonatologist at St. David's and the medical director, and he was very influential in starting the Mother's Milk Bank here. And so he was one of the people that I went to as a mentor and said, how do I do this? And he was one of the ones that just really encouraged me and said that, I think that you have what it takes to make this happen, and I'm going to come alongside you and help you meet with the right people and help you get going. But there were
at that point, because you guys have grown and you're serving a lot of needs now, but the essence of the idea at that point was what? Assistance for mothers, families. What was the kind of the nub of the idea that you had?
I think it began with just peer-to-peer support. I longed for someone to talk to who had been through what I had been through. So it was like, how do I start this peer-to-peer mentoring program where you can take what I call a seasoned NICU graduate parent who's been out of the NICU 3-5 years or longer to hold the hand of a new mom, a new dad. We have male father peer mentors as well. And to come along and address those emotional needs that you're having, answer the questions that you're having open and honest discussions and dialogues around the fear of losing the baby, the fear of what will this baby's life look like long term, and the grief of losing what you thought you were going to have, and the acceptance that you come to of what is life going to look like in the future, but also, inspiration of what can life look like in the future. For me, it was so important for me to see the pictures of NICU graduates who were doing well. And so I love sharing my son's story now. He's 18. He's very athletic. He's doing great in school. We've had a lot of challenges. It was not easy, but being able to share that story is so impactful for a new mom of a 24-week baby.
Yeah. Well, it's I think that's so true with so many things where it's so difficult, if not impossible, when you're in the midst of something to look up and actually see the end game here. And my mom actually has 6 grandsons. She always says, like, it's a miracle that any male even survives, childhood. And she says it kind of jokingly when they've all done, everybody's fine. but it's just because you just look back at outside, away from the hospital, you say, oh my gosh, I can't, how did they survive that? Or what could have happened if this, and you just, as parents, you see this. But I think that's even more pronounced in a much more intensive, no pun intended, experience that you have in the NICU. And, and I always thought, like, it's so interesting when you see across like the animal kingdom and you think, oh my gosh, you just spent 9 months, or in this case, maybe 6 months or 7 months, but still, it's like the better part of a year. And this is the fragile product and what's in store and just the uncertainties. It's so, it's really indescribable, what it's like.
It is. And, we were talking earlier about what's it look like when you go in the NICU. So, they came to get me, to take me to see him for the first time. I had him around 7 o'clock in the evening, and it was 3 a.m, and I didn't want to go. Like, I just had no desire whatsoever to go. And
Why?
I didn't think I could handle it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry.
Take your time.
I feel guilty still. And I tell new moms all the time, don't feel guilty. That is a very natural way to feel. That you are just scared to see your baby hooked up to all these machines. They had brought me a Polaroid picture, and I just remember just staring as hard as I could at this Polaroid picture, and I couldn't see a baby in it. It was hard to just see the baby in it. There was so much equipment, and he was very scary looking, and he didn't look like a baby. And so, my mother, had insisted on taping these pictures to the handrail of my bed, and I didn't even want them on the handrail. Like, she, I think, just instinctively knew that I needed to bond with this baby. So
Moms are, like we said earlier, moms know best,
they're
right?
so great.
Isn't that funny?
So she just told me.
Because they have that perspective, right?
I do. And she told me, she was like, he needs to hear your voice. And it hadn't even occurred to me that my son would know my voice. And so
that is amazing, isn't it?
And it's like, okay.
Oh yeah, he's been hearing you all this time.
He needs to know that I'm there. And so I need to overcome my fear to go be with this baby. This is my baby. And so, they didn't really do anything to prepare me for going into the NICU for the first time. That's something Handhold works very hard to do, to prepare moms and dads for what this first experience is going to be, because this is a very traumatic event. And so they took me down a really long hallway, and of course we had to pass the newborn nursery, and that was kind of the first big jolt of I don't even want to look at these babies. I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm just overwhelmed that that's what I thought my reality would be. But now my reality is in this very secluded part of the hospital behind a locked door. I was like, why does this door need to be locked? And, like you were talking about earlier, you go in and you scrub.
It's like a fortress.
It's a fortress.
Yeah, it is. And you have to scrub for at a certain temperature, and you have to scrub for a certain period of time. And
right.
Yeah.
And so they taught me how to do that. And, I had a C-section. That is, it was not an easy
that's
surgery.
Right.
I was in a lot of pain. I was on medications, and it's 3 a.m. And they took me in, and it is, as you know, it's very bright in there. And I'm seeing all kinds of medical equipment I've never seen before. And I don't know why, but in my mind, I was thinking it'd just be my baby or a couple of babies. And it never occurred to me there'd be 40 to 50 babies, right? And so then even, finding my baby, they took me down several hallways until they wheeled me up to his bed. And, besides his nameplate, there was nothing that made me think this is my baby. You don't look at them and go, oh, he's got his dad's eyes, or my long fingers, or, blonde curly hair, all the things that you are thinking about when you have a full-term healthy pregnancy and birth.
Speaking of dad's eyes, how was your husband? And just what was his emotional? I mean, I can speak for myself, but I'd like to hear what his experience was.
He was phenomenal. He really was. He was a rock. he'll tell you now he really wasn't, but compared to me, he really was. It was interesting because, I was the one who wanted to get pregnant. I wanted to have a baby, and he wasn't ready. And we, we waited for a really long time until he was ready. And so, I was just so into the pregnancy and had read all the books, and, I'm growing this baby inside of me. So of course, I'm feeling the baby and talking to the baby. And, he really hadn't had a lot of involvement yet, right?
Right.
I don't even think he had really grasped the fact that we had a baby coming in a few short months, right? We hadn't done the nursery. There was just, we weren't ready yet. And so to his credit, that switch just automatically flipped and he was on. And I needed him to be on because I was not. I think our roles completely reversed within just hours, and he took charge. Everything from demanding that they take me in the ambulance to the hospital. When they initially checked me, they said that I was fine and I just needed to see my OB the next day. And my husband said, no, we have called ahead. Our OB is meeting us and we have insurance. I just remember him. We have insurance. We want her to go to the hospital. And, he followed along behind us. And, there was no fanfare. There was no lights and sirens and, this big thing. And we were probably just about 10 minutes out from the hospital when they determined that I was in labor. And that's when the sirens came on. So he talks about, he's following along and everything's fine. And then he sees, the lights and here's the sirens.
What time of day was this?
This is rush hour traffic.
Yeah, I was going to say, because you said you were coming home from work.
Yeah, I made home from work. Oh, goodness. So, like around 6 o'clock probably, between that 6 and 7, because he was born right around 7 o'clock. So we're on our way. And so
nice cool weather, August
oh,
in
gosh,
Austin.
it was awful.
Oh, I bet
it was so hot.
Yeah.
And I just, I feel for him that, there was no way for him to communicate with him what was happening. And he just had to, blaze a trail to follow us to the hospital and get there. And then basically when they got me there and they assessed me, I would say young and inexperienced nurse told us there was nothing that they could do. And, he just, I will say at the time, I wasn't proud of all the words he used in his communication because he was demanding that someone more senior get in there and take charge of the situation. And so I was almost embarrassed a little bit, but I'm so proud now that, he knew and he asked for and received the support that we needed as quickly as we needed it. And, everything happened just as it was supposed to for us to be able to, deliver the baby and be resuscitated, for him to have the care that he needed there at St. David's. So, it was a very scary and difficult, challenging time, but he went directly with the baby to the NICU. So I laugh because when I woke up, my sister's boyfriend was sitting with me, and I'm like, why would he, of all people, love him, great guy, but why is he here? And, my sister had arrived. She was going to UT at the time. And so she and my husband she was filling out paperwork, and my husband had gone to the NICU. And he's with the baby. And so I come to, and they tell me that I've had a baby girl. And he says, no, she had a boy. And so they're kind of going back and forth at each other. Is it girl or boy? And I just said, the baby lived? Because it didn't, when they put me to sleep for the surgery, I believe they were just trying to save me, that the baby would not have survived, because I just had never known a baby so early to survive. And so then they're like, no, it is a boy, and he's in the NICU. And my husband had already named him, which I'm glad.
Had y'all agreed on the name before?
Yes and no. I mean, we had our top list, but, we didn't have time to just
we're going with Jackson.
And I'm so glad, because he's such a Jackson. Sometimes you're like, you want to wait and
we're
get to know.
We're big Johnny Cash fans, and we love the song Jackson. So.
Oh, well, I just always thought it would work. Jackson sounded like a great kid name, and then Jack Kelly as an older man to me just sounds like a really important guy.
Right.
That he'll be okay. So anyway, so Daddy did kick in, and he was so great throughout the NICU. But, he had his days that were more challenging. And luckily, when he was up, and I was down, and vice versa. We were really able to provide that support. We know that the NICU, we have a much higher degree of separation and divorce. And so I think it can make you or break you. And,
So you're saying the incidence of separation and divorce goes
yes,
way up.
for NICU families.
Got it.
For NICU families. All but a couple of the people that we had met through our NICU experience are still together. Just a couple. And it's a very grueling experience. And if you're young and, these are your first kids and, dealing with, sometimes a lifetime of medical and developmental challenges, it's hard. It's really hard. And it's financially. So we talk about it's emotionally, physically, financially, and psychologically just devastating. So, it brought us together, and that's how we feel now. We've been together 25 years, I think, and we were like, if we can make it through that, we can make it through anything. There's nothing that can be thrown at us at this point that, would bring us apart.
So 06, 7, 8 time frame, you had this kernel of an idea, I guess based largely on your experience, but also doing the homework and realizing that there was a need out there for this. So take it from there to where we are. I want to make sure we have plenty of time to kind of cover what you're doing and what Helping Hand offers today.
Hand
to hold, excuse me.
We make sure we get that right.
Yeah.
I thought I had a really good idea for a program. So I took it to other nonprofits in hopes that they would start this program. Any Baby Can, March of Dimes, and many others. And again, because of what was happening at that time in our economy, there were a lot of cuts being made. There weren't people investing in new programming.
Oh, yeah.
There was a
your timing is always,
my
you got
timing,
01 and then 07, 08.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of people wanting to donate to a brand new nonprofit at that time. I got lucky. I found an organization that we felt like it was a good fit, and I started it under this statewide nonprofit organization. And that lasted about a year. And we just realized that it wasn't the fit that we thought it was, and that Handle really needed to stand on its own. And I just had multiple investors, private investors, corporate investors, and potential board members saying, I want to be involved, but I want it to be its own 501. And so I still remember, like, I was sitting in the parking lot of the dry cleaner, running my errands with my little babies in tow, and them talking.
Babies, so you
yeah, we'll have to come back and talk about adding that other baby. Yeah. And just really having to stop and say, okay, can I do this? Can I do this? I was really scared to take that leap out to start on my own. And build it from scratch. But I had so many people saying they believed in me and believed in the need, and that they would provide that support and come alongside me, that I finally filed for my own 501. But yeah, I'll go back and tell you that in 2003, so once I had decided to stay home and focus on raising Jackson, I had always known that I always thought I wanted 3 kids. I wanted 3 boys initially. I'm so glad that God knew better, that I needed my beautiful girl. But we talked about that we really wanted a second child. And so I had gone to see a specialist who felt very confident that I could carry a baby to term. And there's a procedure called a cerclage that a woman can have if they feel like their cervix is incompetent and not able to hold a pregnancy. So we knew that was a potential option for us. So since I was with this high-risk doctor who felt confident that we could have another baby, we began to talk about it, and we were thinking about it. And I will say that it happened without us making that final decision. The decision was made for us when we found out that we were expecting. So we were just thrilled. I will say that my parents and my family, my friends, were not as thrilled. I mean, I think everyone thought that we were making a really scary decision.
I can understand.
But we so much wanted that normalcy. We wanted to have that normal pregnancy. We wanted to get to celebrate all those milestones and have the full-term healthy birth experience. And we wanted Jackson to have a sibling. My husband has a sister, and I have a sister, and we just really wanted that for our child. And so I did make it much further. I did not make it to full term. I made it to 34 weeks. And so our daughter...
And 35 isn't 35 term? Is
37.
37 term, okay.
So we made it to
Pretty good.
34.
Yeah.
And, at birth, she looked really good, and they were very confident, and they were going to bring her to my room and let her stay with me, and they never brought her. And so we found out that she was not doing well, and she had started to digress. And so it was a very different situation than her brother, who was born so tiny and sick, and you knew he had to be in the NICU, to having her. She was 5'7" and looked great at birth, but then began to decline. And
the lungs were okay?
The lungs were okay.
Because I know 34 is right about that kind of inflection point.
Right. There can still be a lot of challenges with the lung development and the brain development at that time as well, but for Lauren, she had a blood disorder, and it was related to her brother being born early, and blood types of my husband. It's complicated. But I will say it was a blessing that she was born when she was, because we did not know that she was having any problems in utero. It had not been detected. So it was actually a blessing that we got her out and were able to assess and look at the situation. And she very quickly got the medical care, the blood transfusions, the medications that she needed. So
she was in the NICU as well?
She was in the NICU as well. So I have two NICU graduates. Wow. But I'm very grateful for having the very different experiences, because now I feel like I understand that the NICU is traumatic no matter how long you're in there. You can be in there 24 hours. You can be in there 4 months. It is a very, very difficult situation. Yeah. And so we try to come alongside and support and love on those parents, even that are only in there for a very short period of time. Because what you have to realize is they still don't know what the outcome's going to be. Yeah. They still have a very medically fragile, sick child that they can't hold. And they don't have the same... I think, at the end of the day, we're animals, and there's an animalistic instinct to hold that baby, to bond with that baby. If you think about any baby being born in the wild and how that mom and father protect and care for that baby. And so when the baby is separated from mom and dad and taken to another room, and you have to, like we talked about, you might have to wear a mask, and you're wearing a gown, and you're going scrubbing in, and you have this box, and you can just look at it, and just the sheer urge just to reach in there and hold and be a part of, bond with that baby. And so that's what we try to do.
Yeah. How big is Hand to Hold now? I mean, is it, so you've talked about, and we've got a few minutes, and I want to make sure we cover some other things here, but I'm curious, because I know it's huge. I know it's gone huge. Where are you now?
Well, I will say from a hospital program, so Hand to Hold has many different ideations or iterations. We have a bedside support program. That's where our staff work directly with the families inside of the NICU. And we started here at St. David's Medical Center, because that's where my babies were born. And it did very well. And then we very quickly went to North Austin Medical Center, St. David's North Austin Medical Center. We are starting at Seton Medical Center in October of 2018. So we're so excited about that. We've been waiting for that one for a long, long time. We have been very focused on growth in Dallas. We are at Baylor University Medical Center in Dallas. And we have a Texas campaign right now where we hope to be in 13 hospitals in Texas by 2020. So that's just with the support system within the hospital. But beyond that, our national peer-to-peer program, which is, the very first idea that I had, that is what has the international presence. So we match seasoned NICU graduate parents who have been through our peer mentoring program, training program, with new parents every day all across the country and in all around the world now. And then we started our own podcast about 18 months ago. It's called NICU Now, and we've reached more than 25,000 families in that 18 months. And we have multiple new series coming out, one specifically on NICU nutrition. We have one for NICU nurses called NICU Heroes. And we have a brand new one coming out called NICU Love and Loss, which is for our bereaved families. So through the podcast, we're reaching thousands of families every month as well. But then we have one of the leading websites for information and education about a NICU experience and the post-traumatic stress and anxiety disorders and other challenges that our families face. So at any time, you can reach us through our 800 number or go online and request support. And so we, in many ways, we have a national presence.
And I presume this is just beyond full-time for you?
Yes.
Yeah.
The kids say that it's our third baby.
Yeah.
And it really is. And, I applaud them. They've had to make a lot of sacrifices to make this happen. I think that they're very proud to see that we built it from scratch as a family. But they've had to make sacrifices along the way as well. But I definitely could not have done it without their support and the support of all my friends and family. So many people have really dug in deep and rolled up their sleeves and helped us along the way. So it's been definitely a community effort to see it be successful.
One of the things we like to talk about, really the premise of this is how, and I love it. It's just talking to different people everybody's so different. Everybody's got, they've got different jobs, they've got different responsibilities, they're made up differently. They think of success in different ways, and that's what this is. The idea behind this was, we have so much time on this planet, and you got to make a choice about how you're going to spend your time, and you have a limited amount of time. Like, it's a resource like anything else. And so how you feel about success, or like what you want to be doing in your life, how does that impact your choices? So you obviously are spending a lot of time on something that it hits home for me personally, but obviously for tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of other families, which I think is amazing and such a incredible gift for them. How do you look at the success for you? So, obviously where you are, but you're still young, and 5 years. Maybe what I'll do is hand this over to you and just talk for a second about what it looks like to you today, success, how you would define it. What does that look like, at least as you're looking at it today, 5-10 years down the road? And then how's it different from how you thought about it when you were 22, for example?
I will say that I don't know that I could have ever envisioned this for myself. I don't think I ever saw myself as being a founder, executive director, CEO of a national nonprofit organization. That just was not really the track I was on. But I'm so fortunate. I just love how it all has played out, and that I have this opportunity. I set pretty big goals for myself, as far as, not necessarily like in a notebook on a piece of paper that I have to meet certain goals. But I will say that I drive myself pretty hard. I push myself pretty hard. I'm always going. And I wish sometimes that I could turn it off and go at a slower pace. But Dan Pallotta is a phenomenal speaker and trainer in the nonprofit space. And he has this wonderful quote about being ridiculous. You've got to be ridiculous in your efforts because there are lives at stake. And that's how I feel. That's what keeps me motivated. Just thinking about what it felt like to have that baby and to be all alone. And so just, being willing to put those miles on the car and go to these conferences and have that time away from the family, which is so hard. I got 2 teenage kids that are, very involved in sports and activities, and there's always something going on. And my husband has a very busy professional life as well. So sometimes it's hard to keep all the checks and balances. But I will tell you, I had the opportunity on Friday to stay at the hospital and go to support group. And I hadn't been there in a while. Once you hit the level that I've hit, that, your time is much more spent in a lot of strategy and planning and meetings and traveling. And you kind of lose that opportunity to be on the ground level. And I got so much out of hearing from these parents what it means to them. The hugs and the tears. And I had one mom just keep telling me over and over, I saved her. You saved me. And, it's kind of hard to put a dollar sign on that.
Right.
What other career could I have had? How much more money could I have been making? Where could my career have taken me? But for me, that's success.
Yeah.
And if it's just that one parent, hopefully it's going to be hundreds of thousands of families saying that hand hold saved them.
Yeah. I have other questions I'd like to ask that are more detailed, but I really hate to go on because I want to end on that. And I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Really nice to have you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for doing this.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in today. Breakfast at Stinson's. We were very happy to have you. Next week, we'll be back with another great guest. So please join us. In the meantime, come visit us at Stinson's. We're at 45th and Burnett Road. Come have a taco, a coffee, or a cocktail. Look forward to seeing you. Thanks.